Well, can you? Let me try to start off. I'll test the hypothesis. If I ask right now, where does your thinking take place? Anyone brave enough to give me an answer? Where do you think your thinking takes place? Don't say university. I heard it already, in your head. Yeah? Everyone's thinking, it must be in my head. Why am I even asking the question? You think that it's happening somewhere in your brain. That is to say, you think that's where cognition happens. And if you think this, then of course you shouldn't be faulted. You're agreeing with an age-old view, centuries-old view of the mind. That view of the mind comes something like this. We get information through touch, through taste, through smell, through sight, through hearing, and that information is somehow sent up, manipulated, processed in the brain, and then messages are sent down for the body to be moved. That old idea is the idea that the senses are meant to tell us truly about the nature of the world, that we somehow pick up that content that furnishes the senses, furnishes the mind, the contents of our minds. Now, what's interesting is that age-old view, may be surprising to you, over the past 30 years or so, has been challenged by a range of philosophers and scientists who think that actually quite a lot of what you do with your thinking is done with your hands, with your bodies, with your surroundings. That's to say, thinking gets done in your hands, in part at least, and partly by what the things you are manipulating enable you to do. So some interesting work has been done on gestures in this respect. When I'm standing here talking to you, you see my hand moving, part of my thinking process is going on. And we've seen this when we take away that capacity, the thinking capacities drop. Similarly, even people working in arenas like cocktail servers who have their devices all around them, their different glasses. If you move those out of the right place or change those vessels, their capacity to perform cognitively drops away. And there's lots and lots of data on this, so much so that it's become popular now to talk about an E-movement or an E-turn in the mind. So we're talking about embodied, embedded, and active approaches to the mind that see thinking is happening right out in the world, not just in the brain. Don't worry, that doesn't mean you should not leave your brains at home. It just means that more than the brain is involved in thinking. So that's been an exciting development, but it's left some questions, and one of our contributions, or one of my own contributions to this debate, along with my co-author, is to produce a book in 2013, which has argued strenuously and to provide a philosophical basis for moving us towards this more radical vision about how we think. And in particular, it connects to the idea of when we learn about the nature of information, we understand what information really is, then we really couldn't take seriously the thought that our minds somehow pick up information from the environment through the senses, that the senses tell us truly about the world, and that actually furnishes our mind. So that central idea, that old idea, has to be put under detailed scrutiny. I won't be able to tell you all the details of the argument, but I can tell you a consequence of the argument, that if we take seriously what the best thinking about information tells us, then information isn't the kind of thing that can be literally moved. When we talk about this, we are not talking about the literal pickup of information. Contrast two cases is the best way I can try and capture the thought. When we moved to Australia, we had our car shipped. It was transported. Along the way, we could watch it as it moved down the Suez Canal and other places online. We're trying soon to transfer money to Australia, but that money transfer won't involve the physical movement of any items. We'll transfer the money through making some changes on both sides in 2 different bank accounts, but no literal money moves in that process. That's a metaphor, if we think that. We'd be confused. It'd be quite different if I smuggled the money in my trousers as I come back from the US or the UK. So, in this sense, come back to the original challenge that Clive left me with. It's not just you who can't handle the truth. None of us can. Literally, we don't pick up information. That's a picture. It's not a reality of our capacities. And if so, we really have to rethink the nature of our mind. None of us can literally handle the truth. Now, that's a theoretical maneuver, and you might wonder if that's going to be convincing or on its own, but we've seen this before in history. There's historical precedents for theory driving thinking in quite dramatic and remarkable ways. Copernicus managed to get us to give up an old and very entrenched idea about our place in the universe, the idea that somehow the Earth was at the very center of all things. And part of it, as you can see just from the diagram behind me, was driven by the elegance of the theory that made you rethink what was possible. And in the same way here, elegance of theory may help to redrive and direct work in the sciences of the mind. And this is a shift in thinking of no less than these Copernican proportions. For really, what's at stake here in this debate is nothing less profound than entrenched ideas about what we are and what it means to be a thinking thing. And this really raises the question, which I want to just throw open to the audience. Which domains of theory and practice might you think would need to change if we were to change our mind about this? Any ideas? Education. Any others? Psychology. Okay, good. Thank you. Survey says psychology and neuroscience, of course. Naturally related, we might start to rethink and practice psychiatry and psychotherapy. Interestingly, might surprise you, but we'll be rethinking the nature of the imagination and thereby arts and art performance. Even areas like anthropology and archaeology, sports science, and as the first questioner, the respondent said, education. We have work involved in all of these areas, surprisingly, for philosophical work that's been developed in all of these regions. But I'm going to finish up with just one illustration from education itself and to demonstrate the kinds of ideas and their kind of shift that they require in our thinking. So we've been working with some researchers in University of California, Berkeley, who work in the area of educational design. And they're interested in the question of how children learn, even things as seemingly intellectualized as mathematics. And they've been looking at the way in which children can engage without having any idea of certain concepts to get a deeper and richer learning experience. So here, I'll show you in a moment a video that just demonstrates how children who have no idea what proportion is literally engage with it and come to have a grip on the topic before they learn any words or concepts. And if you look behind me, you can see that certainly in Australia, the thought in orthodox schooling at least, is to concentrate on those cognitive aspects that can be made explicit and learned just in words and numbers. But what's important about the experiment I'm going to show you is the children come to understand proportionality before having any word for it or even any number scale which would help them to deal with it. So you'll see this in just actively in a moment. What's really important, I suppose, here is just that this enables children to get a much deeper and more profound basis for their mathematical knowledge through active engagement rather than learning concepts and rules first, which is the standard mode. So I'll just put the slide up. What you see here is the child is only told that they have to get the screen to turn green. They do so by keeping their hands in proportion to one another, and when it goes red, it doesn't. So they do this long enough, and through active engagements, only later are they introduced to the idea that in doing this, they're keeping their hands in a certain proportion. But they actually become to actively grip the idea of what proportion is before they have any concept of proportion in play. And so, is the lesson here then a contrast between thinking and doing? That wouldn't be the right message that I want to give you. So it's not stop thinking and start doing, but rather, I think the big lesson we have to take away from this is that we must start thinking by doing. Thank you very much.